Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. The hangar at Fort Ridgefield was massive, echoing with every bootstep against the concrete floor. Overhead, long fluorescent lights buzzed quietly, casting a pale glow across the room. The scent of jet fuel, engine grease, and weathered canvas lingered in the air. Rows of folding chairs lined the central corridor, though most of the crowd had already spilled into the open spaces around the parked helicopters and jets. Some of the aircraft looked fresh from the assembly line, sleek, polished, precise, while others bore the dents and scars of missions past, silent proof of survival. The crowd was a mix, seasoned veterans with stiff shoulders and distant eyes, fresh recruits still fiddling with their lanyards, civilian families clinging to pride and curiosity, and a few journalists trying to look invisible behind their cameras. A sense of ceremony floated in the room, but it wasn't formal. It was reverent. Avery sat near the back, her chair half in shadow. Her leather jacket had seen better days, and her boots carried the desert with them. She didn't speak, didn't move much. Just watched. She liked the quiet, liked observing the way people walked, the way they stood, the way they shifted when they were nervous. She understood nervous. She just didn't wear it. At the front of the room, the stage was simple, a podium, a flag, a microphone. Then came the presence. Colonel Nathan Rourke. Broad shoulders, square jaw, uniform perfectly pressed. He didn't need to raise his voice. The moment he stepped up, the chatter died like someone hit a mute switch. He looked over the crowd, scanning them like a field report. Any combat pilots here? His voice didn't shout. It cut. A few laughs rippled. A few heads turned. Some thought he was joking, breaking the ice. But Avery heard the shift. The pause. The way people glanced around, uncertain. The silence was thicker than before. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't make a show of it. She just stood up. It took a second for people to notice. Then another. A couple of heads turned. Then more. Someone whispered her name, maybe a guess, maybe a memory. Monroe. That Monroe. Nate's gaze landed on her like a weight. He blinked once. Then twice. You? He asked. The word wasn't sharp. It was quiet. Testing. The hangar stilled again. Avery stepped forward. Her boots echoed, slow and steady. Every movement precise. Measured. No hurry. No show. Just presence. Eyes followed her as she walked. Recruits leaned forward. Veterans squinted, trying to place her. The ones who remembered said nothing, but their faces changed. The lines around their mouths drew tight. Recognition lived in silence. She reached the front and met Nate's eyes head-on. Major Avery Monroe, she said, clear as day. United States Air Force. Retired. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, like a pin dropped in an empty room, someone gasped. Not loud. But enough. Nate's brow lifted, just a little. His voice dropped an octave. Didn't think I'd see you here. Avery just nodded. I figured it was time. And just like that, the room shifted. The energy changed. The recruits straightened. The veterans leaned in. Dana, tucked off to the side with her camera, focused the lens and muttered, "Oh, this just got interesting." Even Liam, standing among the other young officers, found himself holding his breath. Nobody had expected her. And now no one could look away. Nate stepped aside, giving her the floor. He didn't announce it. Didn't need to. The weight of the moment spoke louder than any introduction. Avery took her place behind the mic, not with a speech prepared or a performance to deliver. Just presence. She stood with the kind of stillness that made noise unnecessary. "Tell us," Nate said quietly, "what was the most dangerous flight you ever took?" Avery didn't answer right away. She looked out at the crowd, rows of uniforms and tired eyes, wide-eyed recruits, and camera lenses half-raised in anticipation. Then she exhaled slowly, like she was releasing something heavy she'd carried for too long. "It was supposed to be a routine evac," she said. "In the mountains near Alchemies. The intel was clean. The route was clear. Until it wasn't." Her voice wasn't dramatic. It didn't rise or fall with theatrics. But it carried. Carried like the sound of an engine in the dead of night. Carried because it was real. We got the call mid-patrol. Ground team was under heavy fire, pinned down. Injured. Command gave us the green light to go in. She paused. A few people leaned in unconsciously. The valley was tight. Wind cutting through both sides. Visibility low. Night goggles on, but the shadows played tricks. You start to see things that aren't there. Or miss the ones that are. Her hands didn't move. Her face didn't change. But her eyes were already back there. Halfway in, our co-pilot froze. Radar lit up red. Incoming fire. Tracers everywhere. He couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Just locked. She looked down at the floor for a beat, then up again. I took over. Nate stood silently beside her, arms folded, listening like everyone else. Liam's fingers were gripped tight around his notepad. Dana had lowered her camera altogether. I had less than 60 seconds to recalculate the descent. Adjust pitch, throttle, bearings. Bullets chipping paint, cracking glass. One engine started to vibrate. Wounded screaming in my headset. And all I could think was, don't mess it up. Not here. Not now. Avery's voice didn't rise. It stayed low, steady, matter of fact. But the air in the hangar felt heavier with every word. We touched down in a clearing the size of a basketball court. Trees on one side, cliffs on the other. Soldiers ran toward us, dragging the wounded. I kept the rotors hot. One hit to the tail and we'd be fire in the sky. Someone in the back exhaled audibly. Avery went on. I don't remember breathing. Just scanning. Calculating. Adjusting. Everything around us was chaos. But inside the cockpit, it was math. Precision. Seconds. She looked at Nate now. When we lifted off, I had 12 men on board. 5 critical. Fuel low. Systems blinking red. Co-pilot still paralyzed. But we made it. Silence filled the hangar. Real silence. The kind that doesn't beg for applause, just understanding. Nate cleared his throat, not to speak, but because he needed a moment. You saved them. Avery shrugged slightly. They saved themselves. I just didn't let the math fail them. Liam whispered something to the officer beside him. The man didn't respond. He just kept his eyes on her, absorbing it all. Dana finally clicked her camera again. Nate leaned closer to the mic. Major Monroe, that's a hell of a story. But tell us this, why now? Why today? Why after all these years? Avery didn't blink. Because sometimes, the stories that matter the most, are the ones we wait the longest to tell. Avery stepped back from the mic, but her presence didn't shrink. If anything, it expanded. The silence in the hangar wasn't awkward, it was loaded. Weighted with respect. Curiosity. Maybe even guilt. She hadn't come to impress. She'd come to unload. And people felt it. Nate didn't speak right away. His eyes scanned her face, as if looking for more than just an answer. He gave a slow nod, then took one step closer. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gone in that night?" he asked. Avery didn't hesitate. "Every day." Liam swallowed hard. From where he stood, the story had become more than just an account of heroism. It was a mirror. A glimpse of what real pressure looked like. What real responsibility felt like. And he wasn't sure if he could carry it like she did. Dana kept clicking, but slower now. She wasn't just capturing a speech anymore. She was documenting a shift. A room waking up. "I remember," Avery said, turning slightly toward the crowd, coming back from that mission. Landing at Blackstone with smoke trailing and rotors whining. The medics rushed in, the ground crew yelling about systems failure. I stepped out of the cockpit and couldn't feel my legs. Not from injury. From the weight. Her eyes moved across the hangar, touching each face without lingering too long. I sat on the tarmac for maybe an hour. No one said anything. No medals. No pats on the back. Just silence. And it felt right. Nate folded his arms again. "You ever talk about it before?" Avery shook her head. "Not like this." He gave her a look. "Why now?" She took a breath, this time slower, heavier. "Because I've seen too many young pilots get told that courage looks like noise. Like shouting, charging in, showing off. But it doesn't. Real courage is quiet. Real leadership is calm. And when the sky's on fire, the loudest thing in that cockpit should be your thinking." That hit something. The crowd shifted again, physically. Shoulders straightened. Backs lifted. Even some of the older veterans gave a subtle nod. Because they knew. They'd lived it. And now they were hearing it from someone who still carried the sound of rotor blades in her bones. "I had to make a call that night," Avery continued. "Stay in the valley and wait for backup, or take the shot and get them out myself. The math said it was 50-50. But I didn't have time for math. I had instinct. Training. And one moment to choose." Nate stepped aside, giving her space again. He didn't need to guide the moment. It was hers. "They trusted me," she said. 12 men. Some bleeding out. Some begging. One couldn't even speak. They trusted me to get them home. Not because I shouted the loudest. Not because I was the bravest. But because I didn't flinch. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything unsaid. Everything remembered. She looked at Liam now, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "You ever freeze?" she asked. Liam blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded once. "Good. That means you're human. Just don't let it last longer than the moment." A murmur moved through the room, small, but real. Nate smiled faintly, not because the moment was light, but because it had landed. Avery hadn't just told them what she'd done. She'd told them why it mattered. And nobody in that hangar would forget it. But Nate wasn't done. He stepped toward the podium again, his voice lower now. "Major Monroe, if you're willing, take us into that moment. The one where it could have all gone wrong." Avery looked at him, then looked out across the room. The air had shifted again, this time tighter. Like everyone was holding a breath they hadn't realized they were taking. She paused, then nodded. "There was one mission," she began slowly. "It didn't make the news. No one outside our team ever talked about it. Not because it was classified, but because we couldn't. Even Dana stopped shooting. Her hands dropped to her sides. Avery's voice didn't rise, but it thickened. We were flying into a civilian zone turned hot. Intel said it was clear, but it was wrong. Again. The enemy had circled back and set up snipers, RPGs. It was an extraction op, 1 unit, 6 men, cornered in a bombed-out school building. One evac chopper had already turned back. The other? Hit before it got within a mile. We were the third option. The last one. The room was frozen now. Only the buzz of the lights above remained. We got hit on approach. A round tore through the side panel, missed my head by 2 inches. My co-pilot panicked, shouted something about turning back. I remember looking at him, dead in the eye, and saying, "We're not leaving anyone behind. Not today." She wasn't smiling. Not proud. Just honest. I took full control. Flipped off the autopilot, dipped under the radar, came in low over the rooftops. We had maybe 30 seconds in the zone before it would be too late. Her eyes darkened. When we touched down, the street was chaos. Smoke, fire, civilians running. Our team was dragging wounded toward us. Then the RPG started. One hit close, rocked us off the ground. I could feel the skids lift. Another inch and we would have flipped. She tightened her jaw. I had to make a decision right then, stay down and risk getting cooked, or take off and leave them behind. There was no right call. No perfect answer. Just instinct. Avery looked at the crowd again. I chose to stay. I maxed the throttle, used the rotor wash to keep the tail from tipping, and screamed at my crew to pull them in. One of the wounded was barely breathing. Another had shrapnel in his chest. We didn't have time to stabilize. We just hauled them in and got off the ground. Her voice slowed. As we lifted, a third RPG came up from the alley. I banked hard left. It missed us by less than a yard. The blast still knocked one of our guys sideways. If I hadn't turned exactly when I did. She let the sentence hang. Everyone could finish it for themselves. 10 minutes later, we landed at Blackstone. The bird was smoking. Hydraulics shot. Tail rotor screaming. But we landed. Every man made it out alive. Nate's mouth opened, then closed again. He didn't speak. Couldn't. Avery looked down at her hands, as if remembering how they felt on the controls. Then she said, "That was the day I stopped flying for the mission, and started flying for the people." The silence that followed didn't beg for applause. It demanded respect. Every recruit, every veteran, every civilian in that hangar sat still, not because they were told to, but because they understood. That was the moment. The storm within the calm. The decision that could break a soul, or define it. And Avery had lived it. She stepped back from the mic, and for the first time since she began speaking, she let the silence settle around her. It wasn't the silence of shock anymore, it was reverence. The kind that doesn't need clapping to validate it. The kind that sinks in and stays. Nate stood beside her again, his voice softer this time. That choice, that moment, how do you carry that with you? Avery didn't answer right away. She looked at the hangar floor like the answer might be written in the cracks. Then she looked up and spoke, not to Nate, not to the officers, but to the younger ones in the back. The ones who were still learning what this life was going to cost. You carry it every day, she said. Some days it's light. Some days it's like dragging metal through your chest. But you carry it anyway. Because you have to. Liam didn't blink. His jaw was tight. This wasn't training anymore. This was the future looking him in the face. There were nights I couldn't sleep, Avery continued. Not because I was scared, but because I kept going over it in my head. Did I wait too long? Did I pull up too early? Could I have shaved off 5 seconds? That's what no one tells you. It's not the bullets you remember. It's the math. She let that hang a moment. After that mission, I didn't fly for a while. Not because I was pulled off the line. but because I asked for the time. I needed to remember why I started flying in the first place. Dana raised her camera again slowly but didn't shoot. She just watched. I spent 2 weeks at Ridgefield after that. Just walking the flight line. Watching rookies run drills. Sitting in empty cockpits at night with the lights off. And I realized, flying isn't just about completing the mission. It's about trust. The kind that lives in the silence between orders. In the seconds before liftoff when your crew looks at you and says nothing, because they already know you've got them. Nate gave her a look. The kind only someone who'd seen it all could give. You ever think about not going back? He asked. Avery nodded. Every day for a while. And what changed? She smiled faintly. Not a proud smile. A real one. I remembered a voice. One of the wounded from that mission. Just before we landed, he grabbed my wrist. Could barely speak. He looked me in the eye and said, "You didn't blink." That was it. 3 words. But they stuck. She looked around again. That's what leadership is. Not blinking when everything inside you is screaming to look away. Liam's grip on his notes loosened. Dana took a single photo, then lowered her camera for good. Avery turned back toward the audience. Her tone was steady, like a hand on the shoulder. You won't always have time to make the perfect call. But you'll always have the chance to make the right one. And that means knowing who's depending on you. Not just above or below, but beside you. The co-pilot who freezes. The soldier who's bleeding. The family waiting back home who will never know your name, but will feel your decisions for the rest of their lives. The weight of her words landed, slow and certain. I didn't come here to inspire anyone, she added. I came because someone in this room needs to hear what I didn't hear when I was your age. That fear is real. Doubt is real. But so is the choice to keep moving. Nate looked out at the crowd, then back at her. You've done more than tell a story today, Major. Avery stepped away from the mic again. I've done what every one of us should do when we make it back. I told the truth. And the truth was still echoing in every corner of that hangar. No one spoke for a long moment. Not because they didn't have questions, not because they weren't moved, but because no one wanted to be the first to break the silence that Avery had earned. Eventually, Nate turned toward her, but he didn't step back to the mic. He just looked at her with something between gratitude and understanding. He gave a single nod, the kind that didn't need explanation. Then he turned to the room. You heard her, he said. And if you didn't, you weren't listening. That was it. No speech. No dramatic send-off. Just that. Avery stepped down from the platform and made her way toward the back of the room. But this time, every pair of eyes followed her, not out of surprise, but out of respect. She didn't walk fast. Didn't wave or acknowledge the attention. She just moved through the hangar the same way she had walked through fire, focused, grounded, and completely present. Liam stepped aside as she passed. He didn't say anything at first, but his mouth opened slightly, like he wanted to. She paused, glanced at him, and offered a small nod. That was enough. His posture straightened. Whatever weight he had been carrying suddenly seemed a little more manageable. Dana lowered her gear, finally slipping the strap from her shoulder. She didn't reach for another photo. She knew she already had the one that mattered. Instead, she pulled out her notebook and scribbled 2 words across the top of the page. She didn't blink. Back near the rear wall, Avery stopped. Not for attention, but because her gaze had landed on one of the old aircraft parked in the shadows. The paint was chipped, the number faded, but she knew that silhouette anywhere. It was one of the birds from her early days. Retired. Quiet now. But still standing. She walked over to it slowly, placed her hand on the cold metal. For a second, her eyes softened. Not with nostalgia. With memory. The kind that lingers in your muscles, not just your mind. Nate had followed from a distance. He stood a few steps behind her, hands clasped in front of him. "Still hear it?" he asked. Avery nodded. "Every time I close my eyes." He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "You know, there are pilots who flew their whole career and never saw what you did. Never felt what you carried." Avery kept her eyes on the aircraft. "That's not the part that stays with me." Nate raised a brow. "What does?" She turned to him, voice quiet. "The trust. That moment they looked at me, bleeding, afraid, and they didn't ask if I could do it. They just believed I would." He exhaled, long and low. "You ever wish they'd told your story sooner?" Avery gave the faintest smile. "No. It's not about when the story's told. It's about when someone's ready to hear it." Behind them, the crowd had begun to shift, conversations picking up slowly. But the tone was different now. Softer. More aware. Recruits weren't talking over each other. Veterans weren't telling old war stories. Everyone seemed a little quieter. A little more intentional. Avery let her hand fall from the metal and turned toward the hangar doors. Light spilled in from the outside, warm and wide. Nate walked beside her. "You going back up again?" She shrugged. "Maybe. Maybe not. Doesn't matter." "Why's that?" She stopped just before the doors and looked at him. "Because flying was never about the sky. It was about the people I carried through it." He stared at her for a long beat, then extended his hand. She shook it, firm, steady. "You changed the room, Monroe." She looked out at the horizon. "That was never the goal." "I know," he said. "That's what made it real." And with that, she stepped out into the daylight. The hangar behind her hummed with quiet conversations, camera shutters, and soft footsteps. But the echo of her words, her choices, her stillness, her leadership, remained. She hadn't come for applause. She hadn't come for recognition. She came because stories like hers, when finally spoken, become something bigger than memory. They become lessons. And for everyone in that room, veteran, recruit, or civilian, Avery Monroe had become something rare, a living reminder that true courage isn't loud, and real leadership doesn't need to shout. She simply stood, carried the weight, and never blinked.